channel, I like to talk about my own personal experiences after losing my daughter. The purpose of this channel is to have a place where families that have suffered the loss of a child can come and get honest about grief, find support and inspiration as we all move towards our own individual paths of healing. If this sounds good to you, hit the subscribe button and don't forget to hit the bell to stay tuned to my upcoming videos. So we're actually working on a six-part series um, of the stages of grief. And for the 5 stages, I've had Kelly Mariano on with me interviewing, asking me questions about grief and the different stages. The reason I did it this way is to kind of get honest about grief. I shouldn't say kind of get honest, to get honest about grief. And he's going to ask me a series of questions that I have no idea what he's going to ask. If you look at the previous videos on anger, denial, depression, and bargaining, and to think about the different stages, um, there have been moments of me, crying, laughing, and all different things, just getting honest about grief. So today we're going to talk about acceptance. So let's get into it.
Hello, Lydia.
Hi.
Hello, everyone. So, as we always start with, let's talk about this. Well, you kind of went over them.
I did, not in
But
order though.
okay, so let's talk about what the 5 stages are. We're going to share those first, and then we'll get into today's stage.
Okay, so the 5 stages of grief are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance.
And today we'll
Is
be talking about
acceptance.
exactly. So to me, this is. I guess we all deal with grieving on some level, but in some ways, you've experienced what people say, and I'm sure you would agree with, is the kind of the most pronounced type of loss is having lost a child. Um, so to me, it seems like everyone's a grieving person to get to this level. They kind of seem like they want people to get to the end of, not like to say, hey, everyone stop grieving, but they want you to get to a point where you're kind of okay, and that would probably be in their minds. Where they may not word it as acceptance, but there's a certain thing they kind of want to get you
Right.
through this grieving process. So share with us what acceptance is from the grieving perspective, what that is to you.
So I didn't feel like I was in that realm of acceptance because the way I viewed it was saying that it was okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so the more I actually started looking at videos on acceptance, because I know that I'm not in that stage yet. But I was looking at videos on acceptance, and it was more not saying that it was okay, but it was just accepting that the person was no longer in your life and that you weren't so consumed with all the woulda, shoulda, couldas that you're actually looking to heal and moving towards the future. So
Okay, so now I hear it
I guess that's what
in
it
your
is.
language. So you feel like you are. Do you feel like you are in that stage, or have entered that stage on some levels? I mean, uh,
Right.
and for you guys who maybe this is your first video watching, we've talked about the fact that the stages are kind of go in sequence, but they're not linear in nature. Would you share that just a little bit so they have an understanding of what that means?
Okay, so actually, at the beginning of this series, I have a video on stages of grief. It is. It's called Stages of Grief. Grief comes in waves, and it actually talks about the 5 stages and how you do experience them kind of in that order, but that they don't stay in that little package. They actually come back in waves. So you may be in um, denial and then it'll go out, and then you'll be in anger, it'll go out, and then you may go jump from anger to depression and then go back to denial. They don't necessarily stay in that little, linear fashion. They come in, they go, and they circle around. you know
Okay, so like for you, do you feel like you've entered into any degree of acceptance? Because I know we've talked
right.
before, and you were stating like earlier on in our recordings that maybe not in the recording itself, but in our conversations that you didn't feel like you had, but then you're saying like
Yeah,
that has changed to some degree.
yeah,
What has well, obviously some of the information you found.
right.
What what have you felt were your experiences to say, oh yeah, I have really entered into that.
Right. So I did actually say it on some videos,
Oh,
like
you did.
I
Okay.
have not entered acceptance. I don't know what, what we're talking about here. So, or even how I was going to do this video because I was like, I'm not there. But when I started researching and doing, you know, looking on YouTube more different videos and journal articles, different things, I saw that you can actually be in acceptance, and it's not like this final stage, but you could be moving into acceptance where you're not so preoccupied on what you could have done,
Hmm.
that you are looking to move towards the future and heal, but that you actually can go back into denial, anger, depression, and still be in acceptance. And so for me, I'm sorry, for me, that definitely was, you said what let me know, that kind of let me know because I am moving towards the healing, but I have parts of me that go back to the depression, parts of me that, but then I'm still saying, you know what, but there's a future here.
Hmm.
I don't have to be, I could be angry, but I don't have to stay there. I don't have to be bitter. Me not being locked into these stages and kind of feeling like this is my home, feeling like I want to move forward, that lets me know that I'm somewhere in the acceptance stage, even if it's in the beginning of it. You know
Okay.
what I mean?
Hmm.
So,
All right, great. Thanks for sharing that. So the way I think of the term acceptance, one could think sort of like it marks when I think of the word acceptance, that it kind of gives the impression that you kind of marked like, hey, now I'm at the end.
right,
But clearly that's not the case. You really kind of just described that,
right.
and that it is a can be a back and forth. And I think that is a challenge because I thought about that when I was preparing for today. I
Hmm.
thought about I was like, Lydia really is in acceptance also. Yeah, I'm not a therapist, nor do I play one on TV. But the thing is, I thought about you in that, and I was like, yeah, she really is in that. But I was wondering what you would be thinking by the time we recorded this.
Yeah.
But that's cool.
Which is funny. I'm just going to say this, which is funny because even me, like, I mean, with grief, everybody, if you're grieving, that you don't fully understand what you're going through. I think it's um, important too to kind of educate yourself on things because I looked at it like that, like, oh, the finale. Will I ever be in acceptance? Will I ever feel like this is okay? But the more I understood that acceptance isn't this thing that you get to and then everything's fine.
Hmm.
It's something that you're constantly moving towards healing. You're constantly doing the work that it takes to, the hard stuff, talking about it and moving forward and starting new traditions and different things that you have to do
Yeah.
to, like, get out of those other stages to start moving towards healing. Not saying you'll never fall back into those stages, but making a conscious decision to not be stuck there. I think
I
that's
think
it.
that's one of the keys is for people to understand watching the video is that you are going to go, or you definitely can go back and forth and realize
Right.
that's a normal part of that
Exactly.
process. It's not like something's wrong with you because you're going back or like you're not making progress. It's just the way you go through and
Exactly.
are going through it. We talked about there's a gentleman on YouTube, Counselor Carl. Shout out to Counselor
Counselor
Carl.
Carl.
But I'm gonna share part of one of his statements on acceptance,
Yes. Good.
and then I'm gonna get your thoughts on it. Acceptance comes after we have closed our eyes, kicked and screamed, pleaded and begged, cried and hurt, and then finally figured out how to live life in the new normal. We still hurt, but not the same as before. We focus more on the present and the future. Um, I had here that about our conversations before about not being in acceptance,
Hmm.
so we already kind of got through that. So, what are your thoughts on his statement? Is this something you're in agreement with?
Yeah, I think he's kind of on point with that kicking and screaming that, you know, it's not that you're overjoyed about it and doing cartwheels either.
Exactly.
It's just that you're making a choice really to not stay stuck.
Hmm.
And it's a hard decision. It's not easy. It's not and it's a constant thing. So it's even though you made that decision, you're like, you know what, today I'm gonna really do something to heal and whatever. It doesn't mean that because you might fall back into something else that somehow you're like
Kind of like
wrong.
you're, yeah.
Yeah, like
Hmm.
you're like somehow you're grieving wrong or you're not getting it. It's nothing to get. It's just you working through this, and part of working through it is falling back sometimes.
Hmm.
And then coming out of that, you might learn something when you fall back into that depression, that anger, that denial. It might be something to be learned in that stage as to why you fell back. And then when you reemerge, it's a constant,
Hmm.
So
Yeah, I
I
think.
do agree with that statement to answer the
Okay.
question.
Yeah, I think it's um, important for people to really give others, and if you're watching this and you have a loved one that is going through a grieving process, it's
Hmm.
important to remember to allow them to go through the process the way they're going through it.
Right.
Be there to be supportive, definitely not judgmental as to how
Yeah.
they're going through it. I have it here later somewhere in my questions, but sometimes we kind of get the impression that maybe if I go through the grieving process too quickly, like maybe I didn't really care
Right.
as much. And you really don't want to get into comparing. That's not good at all in life in
Hmm.
general.
Hmm.
But in this in particular, you don't want to get into comparing, oh, we both lost our dad, but you only
Right.
cried for 2 months. I cried for 3.5 months. That's just
Right.
foolishness because I don't know what's going on inside of you, where you are in your
Right.
stages, and you don't know where I am.
Right.
You just know what you see. And that's the thing where we get judgmental sometimes about what someone's going through instead of just allowing them to go through the process. Our friend, Counselor Carl, also said that there is no closure. Do you agree with that? That there's no closure in grieving? And is this true regardless of how the loss occurred? What I mean, do you understand what I
Right.
mean?
Hmm.
Okay.
Um, I think it's an individual thing.
Okay.
Some people may find closure in certain things. Um, all depends. You know what I mean? Because I know what he's probably saying. Like there is no closure because that forever was your
The
child.
loss is forever.
Yeah,
Exactly.
you're always gonna feel a sense of loss there. However, some people may find closure if their child, like you said, circumstances is murdered, and then the murderer gets sent to jail or gets the death penalty or whatever you feel as though is accurate punishment for that crime.
Hmm.
You might find closure in that. You know what I mean? And then you're able to grieve and maybe um what do you call it? I'm trying to think of the word. You're able to maybe I'll just say you're able to find closure. You're
Okay.
able to you know what I mean? You're able to I'll just leave it at that because I can't think of the word. But yeah, I think it all depends on a person. Grief is an individual thing. Some people may find what they call closure,
Hmm.
um, which just in closure, maybe it means just not being stuck in that stage. So now I can move towards that process of healing.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? Like it depends on what you think of the word closure. I have no idea.
Exactly. The thing I thought about, I mean, that was a good example, like if someone got murdered and,
Yeah,
someone paying a price for it. But I also thought about the context in which, like, sometimes when a person is dying, if they
right.
get a chance to go through it, not a chance, but it sounds like an opportunity.
Hmm.
But if they go through a dying process, you may have a chance to engage them, love on them,
Right.
heal some old hurts and stuff
Hmm.
like that and go through it. And some people may find that the closure that they
Right.
need, whereas if someone just dies
Yeah.
right away, unexpectedly, it brings up a different dynamic. I would
Yeah.
think, at least to some degree.
Yeah. I mean, they do say like sudden death is harder. And when I say they, I'm just talking about psychologists and different grief groups and different people that I've come in contact with that talk about grief. They say, like, not because I don't want to people to think I'm saying like, oh, if you knew your child was sick or you had a chance to say goodbye, it makes it any easier.
Hmm.
It doesn't, you know. But what I'm saying is, I could feel what you're saying as far as it happening like that.
Exactly.
It's yeah, it's different. Yeah.
Well, I mean, in this particular, in your particular case with Brianna passing
Yeah.
the way she did, it's not like she was suffering with like a long-term illness that you knew was gonna. So you were able to, unfortunately, have to deal with that
Right.
side as well. But that's a good point to point out that it's not.
Yeah. Either
Again,
way,
that'd
you're
be getting
losing your
into
child.
degrees of
Right.
grieving. Oh,
Agreed.
you're not really grieving because you didn't experience this on this level.
Right.
And that's like I said, it's just not good to think of it that way anyway,
Yeah.
and just let people go through what it is they need to work through.
And because people could always look at it like the grass is greener, like, I
Hmm.
mean, and there's no green grass in this situation. But what I'm saying is, people do compare grief
Hmm.
and they do say, well, you got to say goodbye, at least you knew your daughter was sick. And then the person that got to say goodbye and knew they were sick would say, yeah, but it was drawn out.
Yeah.
I would have rather them just go because it was such a painful thing to sit in.
Yeah.
So people do compare grief. The results are the same. Your child is not with you.
Hmm.
And that is the part that is like agonizing. So
The word agony. So previously, Counselor Carl, and we've talked about this as well, about the concept of creating a new norm. Can
hmm
you share with the audience what that means to you, or how you perceive the new norm?
I think that maybe I should do more research on that too. Well, I know the new norm is just, I think, coming to terms with the fact that your child passed and now you have this new life um, without your child. I always get mad at that statement because I'm like, how can it be new but then be normal? You know what I mean? Because I'm
Hmm.
like, they just don't merge. Normal is me with my kid. Now you want it to be a new normal. It's not going to be if it's new, so
Hmm.
whatever. But what I'm saying is just like the acceptance thing, and I was like, oh well, I'm not going to be in acceptance anytime soon. And I've said that through plenty of videos, not because I didn't want to be, but because my understanding of acceptance was not maybe accurate.
Hmm.
So with the new normal, I think maybe I have to do some
Maybe get a different
research on
perspective on
that
it.
to look at it a different way because I'm resistant to the new normal. I mean, I'm living in it,
Okay.
but I'm not okay with it. That
Hmm.
whole what did he say? You have to. What did he say? Like you have to.
I didn't capture all of that, just that he was
Okay.
talking about the new norm.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure because some people are like, you have to. Even when I went to support groups for grieving parents, they were like, now you're in the new normal. You have to get used to the new normal, and that phrase just rubbed me so wrong because
Hmm.
part of that was like, well, if I am in this new normal and I'm happy in my life, is that saying like something about my child that passed, like that I'm okay without her? And what does that mean? You know what I mean? That
Hmm.
my life would now be all right and she's not existing in it. It's like a hard concept for me to understand. So I probably just have to research more.
Hmm.
So
Is it, and it's still tied into the concept of the acceptance being like okay.
right, that's what
Yeah,
I'm
yeah, that's
saying.
all.
Just
Yeah,
like
they're all
yeah,
still a little intertwined.
right, just like
Yeah.
I thought the acceptance was like, oh, it's saying you're okay, but when I did more research or understood it better, it wasn't saying it was okay. It was saying I'm going to focus more on the future and not on the denial and the bargaining and the anger, like all the different stages where I'm trying to change what has happened. That's more in the bargaining stage, trying to change that outcome. What if I would have done this? coulda, shoulda, woulda, you know, it's like just saying it happened. There
Hmm.
was no way to change it. I could let myself off the hook. I'm gonna move towards the future of healing and still loving my child, still grieving them, but moving towards the future of finding a purpose again. You know
Hmm.
what I mean? So
Okay. One more shout out to Counselor Carl. But he mentions that, and
Counselor Carl's taking over my video.
he also talked, and but you've talked about this a number of times about the concept of not ever being the same again.
Oh, of
Now,
course.
this and to have it in perspective for you guys, because this is your first video, we talked about Brianna, but it's been 5 years,
Hmm.
right? Well,
Coming
we're
up
really
on
close on
6.
6, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, but the reason I wanted to point that out is just for people to have an appreciation for it takes as long as it takes. You know what I mean? Like we talked about that in other videos, but again, if you're watching this, then this is your first one.
Right.
You may not have caught on to that or what have you, but that's just something to keep in mind. But speak to that whole the concept of nothing being the same. Like we're coming up into the holidays,
Yeah.
like that affects everything.
Yeah, it definitely does. And it's funny because I'm going to now talk about Counselor Carl because when I watched his video, he actually was talking about the average for a grieving parent to stay is 3 years.
Hmm.
To like get through the grieving process is 3 years. I'm working on 6, so
Hmm.
and I have no qualms about that. It's all up to you as far as time and everything. You are never the same. Your identity, I think, in being a parent includes that child that existed. So now that that child isn't there, you're still a parent, but um it changes you. You know what I mean? Like
Hmm.
it changed me a lot for the better. You know, and I think that that is something too to be aware of is that although maybe that's more moving towards the acceptance stage, but it's like although this tragedy happened, it puts things in such a perspective to always be grateful for the small things.
Yeah, he kind of talked about that too. Like your perspective on things changes
Yeah.
when you realize, when you lose something, someone very
Well,
precious
yeah.
to you, you realize all the moments are precious.
Right.
They all are.
They are.
Hmm.
And time, like you think you have all this time, but then when your child passes, you realize how fast something could be gone.
Hmm.
It's like a blink of an eye. Um, Everything. You work so hard to provide for your child. You're probably sometimes 8 to 10 hours, 12 hours. But when are you actually spending time with that child? You're working to
That's so
provide
important.
this life
Hmm.
and you're
Hmm.
working to do all this stuff to give them everything. But when are you living?
Hmm.
When are that quality over like, quantity, giving them all this stuff is like the quality time, you know what I mean? So all those things I learned. I learned about my own strength.
Hmm.
I learned about my resilience. I learned about everything. You know what I mean? So you're definitely different. I seen a quote that was like, it said something like, you went in the wilderness one way and you came out another,
Hmm.
type thing. And it's the truth. Like, it's a devastating ordeal, to go through. But what can you gain through that wilderness? What are
Hmm.
you learning about yourself? What are you picking up? And and what are you taking into the future? You know what I mean? Like,
Exactly. Hmm.
so I think the acceptance, I think I am in it. And I might fall back,
Hmm.
but I'm there in it. And with the holidays, it's definitely plenty of time for you to fall back.
So,
You know,
hmm.
it's the most wonderful time of the year. But for a lot of people,
This
it's
is
not.
this is a challenging time for
Yeah,
a lot of people for
yeah,
various reasons, but
right. That's what I'm
especially in
like.
those situations.
And it's bittersweet because it's like you remember all the traditions, but then even with that whole new normal or whatever, being a different person now, you may have to start new traditions.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? So it's just a it could be a difficult time. Yeah.
I think it's an interesting component to hear someone that is going through it talk about the part where you're thinking about the gains that come from going through the process, because it takes a while to get to the point, I would imagine,
Hmm.
to be able to see any um, gain being able to be had after the fact. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That was powerful. But I also wanted to touch on, you talked about the fact that when you lose, you lose your child, that you're still a parent. I'm wondering how, and I don't know if you've had any experience with any of the folks that you've helped with the foundation,
Hmm.
experiences where the child that they lost was an only child.
Right.
So do they do? I mean, I don't know if you know, but I'm imagining it might be some battle in their mind. Am I technically still a parent?
Right.
You know
I
what I'm
mean,
saying?
I
Like what
understand
moving
what you.
forward? Yeah.
Right. I understand what you're saying, but I don't think it's that much of a battle. I mean, it is, but it's not, because that's always going to be your baby. It's always going to be your child. I guess I can understand what you're saying, but at the same time, when people say, "Oh, how many children do you have?" You're still going to say, "I had one." You know what I mean? I
Hmm.
mean, you might not feel like answering the question and just say no, but for the most part, in your heart, you're always going to be that child's parent. It's I don't think it's ever in question. I'm always going to be Brianna's mother.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? Whether I answer to people based on how I feel in the moment of how many kids I have
Hmm.
might be different, but in my heart of hearts, she's always my child. I'm never like, oh, am I a parent to her? Like, that's my baby. Like, so I
Hmm.
think for them too. I know what you're saying, but I think at the core of it all and in their heart, they're always going to be
Hmm.
their child's parent, you know?
Okay. All
Hmm.
right. Well, we kind of talked about this. That was the part about where acceptance is kind of in. It has its own stages. So it's not like something you just, oh,
Arrive
just
at.
one day you wake up, I've accepted this, and,
Right.
and, and move on. And I think that's closer to that context of the way you were looking at it in terms of it being okay. Like
Hmm.
someday it's just going to be okay, and it's not okay. Brianna's gone.
Right.
It's the fact that Brianna's gone. Now I have to be okay after that fact, really, and not so much with the fact itself.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, exactly what you said. It's not I'm okay, she's gone. It's she's gone, and I have to find a way to heal and to still be okay with me existing in this realm without her. That's
Exactly.
just
And
what
that
it
was a
is.
challenge in the beginning. You talked about that too.
Oh,
The
that's
whole,
still a challenge.
oh, oh, okay.
I'm in acceptance, like in the somewhere in there,
Hmm.
in the realm of it. Um, but it's still difficult. That's why I think I'm in that in acceptance, but falling back, but there, but I'm there. I'm somewhere in there.
Okay. Yeah. Making your own
Yeah,
progress.
progress, right?
I think oh, we talked about this about not grieving on the same level. I was
Mhm.
making a statement that it was important to mention. So there's no specific timetable as we talked about, but we also talked about already that the greatest loss that they talk about is the loss of a child. But
Mhm.
with grieving, or really with the whole grieving process, he talked about you kind of, Council Carl,
Mhm.
talked about the whole idea of going two steps forward and one step back, and that all ties into. I think that was it really stood out to me because we've talked about this a lot in terms of how the stages you kind of go back through them and stuff like that. But that really captures this a sense of what it's really not in the fullest, right? But I mean, it captures the idea like, yeah, I'm making this progress, and then all of a sudden you get
Right.
knocked back. And you talked about this earlier too. That doesn't mean um, you know,
Done
not
grief
going back
wrong.
like, yeah,
Right.
like you failed in
Right.
some way in your grief process.
Right.
It's interesting that as adults we look at failure differently than we do for
Mhm.
children. Like when a child's learning to walk, they fall all the time. No one thinks, oh, they're failing all these times.
Right.
That's just part of the process. And for this, I think it's important for people to realize that's just part of the process.
Right.
Um, that happens in a lot of things as adults that we go through where you're not going to go through it cleanly. It's not going to be, oh, I'm going
Mhm.
to just give this a shot and then be successful and walk this right out.
Right.
There is no just walking grief out, especially with the loss of a child,
Mhm.
without any, you know,
Yeah.
backstepping. You know, well, I don't want to call it like backsliding, but you know what I mean, without going backwards in some
Right.
degree. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely agree with that. It's always going to be two steps forward, one step back, two steps forward, one step back. Even when you think that you're there or you have arrived or whatever, there's always the possibility of triggers. There's
Mm-hmm.
always holidays.
Always.
There's
Yeah.
always even a time um, frame can put you back as far as like, dang, this is the 10th year anniversary. This is the 20th year or
Oh, wow.
whatever.
Yeah.
Or my child would have been 21 today. And that can send you back. There's things all the time that could put you back, but it's not a setback.
Mm-hmm.
It's even if you fall back, what have you gained from it that you can move forward? You
Mm-hmm.
know what I mean? And try to walk through your journey of grief.
So we're at the point where I ask you, do you have any overall final thoughts that you want to share specifically about acceptance?
I think it's important that you understand acceptance isn't a like a final destination. I think that acceptance is one of the stages, just like denial, anger, bargaining, and depression, where you can fall back. You know, the way I used to look at it was like, oh, I'll finally arrive and I'll be healed.
Mm-hmm.
But that's why I say our journey towards healing, it's an action word. You're constantly going to be healing. So I think that that's important. Not to beat yourself up about it, and you know, I guess for people that are supporting those that have lost a child, the expectations once again that they would be at this point of arrival.
Mm-hmm.
Have fair expectations that no, it's going to be a constant thing that they have to work through, and if you really are a friend and support, that you'll be right beside them as they're going through two steps forward and one step back. You got to be there for the good and the bad.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like my thoughts overall.
Let me ask you something.
Mhm.
Have you had to step away from people in order for your grieving process to move forward? Do you know what I mean? Like, have you found any? Were there any? I'm not obviously asking for names, but have you ever had situations where you're like, man, this person has
Yeah,
been dragging me down? You know what I mean? Or not necessarily because they're maybe they're trying to nudge you along too fast, or they're trying, oh, you know,
yeah.
like,
I mean, I definitely have experienced that where um, because they're not at a place where they can allow me to grieve how I want,
yeah.
or like they don't have that understanding that grief is an individual thing or whatever. Then yeah, I have had to remove myself or give them a timeout or me a timeout or however
Whatever
you
you want
want
to
to,
look at it. Yeah.
yeah, and just take a step back because I'm not going to be forced into
Exactly.
a box of whatever they think that grief should look like.
Mm-hmm.
It's my
They're
own,
trying to put Lydia in the little grief box.
right,
Yeah.
exactly. It's my own journey, and I have to go through what I have to go through in order to come out on the other side.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so I guess that's another tip. Is that, as you're moving towards the acceptance, to grieve the way you want.
Mm-hmm.
Don't be forced into or feel like you're forced into grieving a certain way. You have to go through what you have to go through. When it starts becoming like self-harm, then perhaps you need some help. But you know, and you should look for some alternatives. But outside of that, do what you need to do. Yeah. So.
Okay. Did you want to? We didn't talk about this before. Did you want to give final thoughts on grief as a whole, or were you going to do that in a separate video? I didn't know if you had any thoughts on that. And then I wanted you to share
Where they could find me.
exactly. That was a good guess.
So grief as a whole, I think, yeah, it's a whole lot, but I'll just try to put it in one little thing. Grief as a whole is messy and it's all over the place. And that's okay.
Let's see.
It's okay. It's okay for it to be messy, for you to be all over the place, for you to not have it all together. Um, I was, before my daughter Brianna died, I was a bit of like having everything together, so I thought, like a control freak, I guess, to a degree. But wanting everything to be lined up and perfect and, you know, go a certain way. And when you lose your child, you realize you have no control at all. You know,
Hmm.
you just don't. And so I think it's important to like understand, even with going through grief, because I've been struggling with that being part of my personality too, with the grief aspect of feeling like oh, I'm not in bargaining yet. I'm not in whatever, or I'm not over the anger yet. I
Hmm.
didn't get to, get through this depression fast enough. I just want to be in acceptance, be in that stage. But once you realize, too, like I said, acceptance isn't a destination, it's just another stage that you're trying to work through to get more and more healing so you can process through life and progress through life. So I guess that's my final thought, is just to not try to control grief, just let it happen because it's going to, and work your way through it, and don't beat yourself up about it, about where you're at. Just be where you're at and work through it. Okay. So you can find me on Instagram, Life After Losing My Child, also here on this channel. Um, I put this, well, this is going to be on the actual playlist. So you could kind of watch the different stages in order. And the first video is actually an overview of all of them. So that's about it. I'm looking to start some other projects, which I will keep you um, abreast to what is going to be happening for the future, but which is hopefully maybe some radio, like a podcast or something, and also a blog that I'm trying to do. So, and they'll both be entitled "Life After Losing My Child," so I'll be easy to find. So thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the button, stay tuned, share this with people that have suffered the loss of a child, or people that you know need to support those that have lost a child. And see you next time. Bye.